Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping way back in time to unravel what I think is a totally fascinating historical mystery. We're looking at one of the most profound shifts in human history, how the ancient, deeply Jewish texts about Jesus of Nazareth were eventually translated into the language of Greek philosophy. It's a story of majestic ancient concepts, really intense council debates, and a translation that literally changed the course of theology forever.
So what exactly happens when a profound Jewish truth gets translated into a Greek philosophical language? It's a great question, right? I mean, think about how hard it is to just translate a joke or a poetic phrase from one language to another. Now, imagine trying to translate an entire worldview. What happens when a truth rooted in stories of temples, kings, and divine representatives gets ported over into a language obsessed with abstract substance and nature? Are things gained, or is something absolutely vital kind of lost in translation? That's the exact narrative arc we're going to explore today.
Part 1. The original Jewish matrix. To really grasp this, we've got to remember that the earliest followers of Jesus were Second Temple Jews. They definitely weren't sitting around using abstract Greek metaphysics. And it's super fascinating to contrast these two totally different ways of viewing the world. The Jewish framework is basically all about action. It asks, what's your vocation? Who do you represent? But the Greek framework, it asks entirely different questions, like, what is your underlying substance? What is your exact invisible nature or ontology?
Let's look at how that Jewish framework actually operated on the ground. Take the Hebrew word tselem, which is usually translated as image, like when Genesis says humanity is made in the image of God. Now, in the ancient Near East, a king obviously couldn't be everywhere at once, right? So he'd place a statue, his image, in a city to represent his ultimate authority. When these ancient texts call humanity, and ultimately Jesus, the image of God, they aren't talking about physical resemblance or sharing some invisible substance. No, they're talking about a vocational commission. You are commissioned to be God's living, breathing representative, working right there within creation.
Part 2. The Supreme Divine Agent.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this idea of representation leads directly into the legal ways the ancient Jewish world actually understood authority. They had this brilliant concept called the Shaliah, or the agent. And the rule was simple but incredibly powerful. The agent of a person is exactly like the person himself. An agent speaks and acts with the full authority of the one who sent them. So when you read the Gospel of John and hear Jesus making these massive I am statements, he's actually speaking perfectly within this context as the ultimate Shaliah.
You can actually see this perfectly laid out in the book of Matthew, chapter 10, verse 40. Whoever receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. This is the Shaliach chain in action. Receiving the agent is literally receiving the sender. And that's not because the agent and the sender have somehow magically morphed into the exact same being, but because the agency is absolutely flawless.
There's an analogy that brilliantly illustrates this point. The Greek word corrector, which is used in the book of Hebrews to describe Jesus as the exact imprint of God, literally refers to the stamp on a wax seal or a minted coin. Think about it. The coin derives from the die. It bears the die's impression perfectly, and it goes out into the world to represent the king's wealth and power. It's a perfect representation, but it obviously isn't the king himself.
Now, to us today, saying Jesus is a supreme, divine, but subordinate agent might sound a bit unfamiliar. But in ancient Judaism, this was a highly potent, totally thinkable concept. Just look at the traditions they already had. Proverbs 8 spoke of personified wisdom being brought forth before the world even began. The philosopher Philo wrote all about the Logos, calling it a second divine power. Jewish mysticism even had figures like Metatron, no, not the Transformer, an exalted heavenly agent who shared the throne and actually bore the divine name. The early Christians weren't just inventing a brand new category out of thin air. They were claiming Jesus was the final, perfect reality that all these traditions were pointing to.
Part 3. A three-tiered universe.
Let's see how this builds and how these Jewish concepts logically stack together. Imagine a three-tiered universe. At tier 1, right at the top, you have the Father, the uncaused prime mover. At tier 3, way down at the bottom, you have all created beings, angels, humans, the cosmos. But situated perfectly between them is tier 2, the Son, the supreme divine agent. He's eternally derived from the Father, completely superior to all creation, and yet subordinate to the source. And here's the thing, this middle tier isn't just a neat organizational idea. It's actually philosophically necessary. A totally infinite, transcendent God really needs a perfect mediating agent to interact with a finite, limited creation without blowing it to pieces or compromising his own transcendence. The supreme divine agent acts as that perfect bridge.
Part 4.
the Greek translation. But of course, history didn't just stay neatly in that Jewish matrix. As Christianity rapidly expanded, it moved into the Hellenistic, Greek-speaking world, bringing us to a major historical pivot. Trace this shift with me for a second. We start in antiquity with Genesis and the living image. Then, in the 1st century, the apostles are using the legal language of the Septuagint. But fast forward to the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, and the language is completely shifted to Greek terms of abstract substance. So what happened?
Well, it's really important to know that the council wasn't just sitting around trying to corrupt the faith. Actually, they were responding to a very real, very pressing crisis. A teacher named Arius was pushing what they saw as a highly dangerous idea. He was trying to demote the Son from that majestic Tier 2, pushing him all the way down to being a mere Tier 3 creature. He argued Jesus was basically just another created thing. And the church leaders rightly saw this as totally stripping away the cosmic majesty of Christ.
So, backed into a corner by Arius, the council desperately needed a way to fiercely defend the majesty of the Son. To do this, they borrowed a Greek philosophical term, homoousios, which means of the same substance. And honestly, it's a completely understandable, even noble defense against Arius. But in doing so, they inadvertently closed the door on that beautiful, traditional Jewish Tier 2 middle ground. So the absolutely crucial point here is this. What happened at Nicaea was essentially a well-intentioned category substitution. They were trying to answer functional, Jewish vocational questions, like who does Jesus represent? But they were using Greek substance metaphysics, asking what invisible stuff is he made of? They translated functional titles of agency, like image and imprint, into claims of exact identical substance.
But, as you might guess, this Greek translation introduced some pretty profound philosophical complexities. I mean, if Jesus is the exact same infinite substance as the Father, how does an infinite, all-knowing divine substance seamlessly unite with a limited, suffering human nature? It's a huge paradox. And theologians have had to engage in centuries of incredibly deep, meticulous philosophical formulation just to articulate and defend it.
Part 5. The Spring and the River.
So what happens if we step back out of those dense council chambers and move toward the original source texts? Returning to the ancient Jewish matrix actually offers a really elegant resolution to those intense philosophical complexities. It honors Christ's absolute supremacy over creation as the divine agent, while also making perfect logical sense of his derivation from and submission to the Father. No clunky paradoxes required.
And the ancient writers actually had a breathtakingly beautiful way to describe this. They said, the Father is the eternal spring, the Son is the eternal river. Just let the poetic power of that wash over you for a second. Think about the profound elegance of this analogy. The Son is derived from the Father. He is subordinate to the source. The spring is always prior to the river, and yet the river is eternal, because a perfect spring, by its very nature, must flow. There's literally never a moment where the spring exists without its river flowing. The Son is the perfect, eternal, necessary outpouring of God.
By understanding this translation shift, we really unlock a much more relational, dynamic picture of who Jesus was to his earliest followers. So, I want to leave you with this question. If we put down the Greek philosophical lenses for a moment and return to the ancient Jewish matrix of the Shaliah and the living image, how does it change the way you read the story of the ultimate emissary? Thank you so much for exploring this explainer with me. Keep asking questions and keep seeking the truth behind the text.